Always good to chat. Thanks for hopping on. And I'm sure you've heard this question about a million times so far. Is Miami back? When do you think we're going to know the answer to a question like that this season?
Well, we'll probably know at that opener against the Florida Gators, August 31st, right? I mean, I know Florida's coming off a rough season at 5-7, but that's a great sort of litmus test to see how good this Miami team really is. I think they're good enough to win the ACC this year and make the college football playoff. But I think we'll know after that first weekend if these guys have put some of the struggles that they've endured here over the last several decades behind them with that very important opener.
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy storyline year, right, for the big three teams in Florida. Like Florida State's suing the league they're in, and that stuff's going on with that. Miami can't quite get back to being Miami, and like everybody thinks Florida's going to fall apart this season. I can't quite remember an opening to a season with the three main Florida teams that's quite like this.
Yeah, it really is unique. I think you look at Miami's opponent in the opener. For sure, Billy Napier's under a lot of stress and heat over there, especially the way last season ended, where they lost their last 5 games and finished 5-7. They've had a bunch of NIL fiascos as well with Jaden Rashada and well documented situation there. And Florida State, you mentioned the Seminoles, but they're obviously coming off a great season. But they've got that as the backdrop, right, leaving the ACC and whether or not they're going to take off. So there's definitely a lot to write about over here, for sure.
That is a fact. Never dull down there. I want to hit you with some of that big picture stuff before we get more in-depth here into the Canes. Like, obviously, the news just came out earlier today about Florida State and, their mediations with the league. And, of course, that didn't produce anything that went anywhere. What do you make out of this, being in the state of Florida, where all these lawsuits are going down? What is the general view of how this is affecting the ACC, Florida State, by proxy Miami, of how all this is going down right now?
Yeah, well, I got a chance to sit down and talk with ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips in Charlotte last month for the ACC kickoff. And my takeaway from our conversation is that he feels pretty confident that if Florida State and Clemson end up getting out of the ACC, it's not going to be because the ACC lets them go. It's going to be because they find a way out of the grant of rights. And if that happens, then everything in college football ultimately becomes chaos. We probably go to a super league where you basically have 2 conferences because it'll make all the conference agreements, void in court. And so he's fairly confident that, yes, FSU and Clemson want to fight. They want to make more money. They want to create all sorts of chaos. But ultimately, he feels like he's got the right side of the argument here, and that ultimately they're going to just have to accept the situation that they're in. And he certainly tried to make things better with, more revenue sharing in terms of winning in the postseason and how that's going to help teams that try to win and ultimately win in terms of helping them financially. So I don't know where we're ultimately headed with all this, but I know right now we're not anywhere near close to a resolution with Florida State, the ACC, and Clemson.
Absolutely not. Nowhere near the finish line on something like that. And, they're suing each other in multiple states. Like, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be resolved. I'm curious, Manny, where does Miami fit into this puzzle when we look at the future? Because, I think it's kind of obvious. Florida State's a big fish right now. Clemson's a big fish right now. People think about Miami like you think of all these great teams and all these great players. But, man, it's more than 20 years ago now, and Miami just hasn't had that level of success of late. Where does Miami fit in the big picture of college football, like if there is to be something like that coming in the next 5 to 10 years?
It's a great question. I think Miami's leadership is very proud of the fact that they just became AAU certified. Which is obviously a big deal in the Big Ten in terms of academics and being able to fit in there. That's what the Big Ten looks at. I think, behind closed doors, Miami's leadership would tell you that if they were going to end up in another conference, it would be the Big Ten. They see themselves as more of a fit there than the SEC. So if we end up going to the Super League, I think, especially if Miami turns it around on the football field and becomes more of what the ACC hoped it would have become when it joined the conference in 2004, then I think the Big Ten would be interested in probably adding a program like Miami and even You talk about Florida State and where does Florida State go? I don't know that Florida State and Miami would end up in the same conference, which would obviously be a shame. But I think if we ever got to that point, I think USF, which is in Tampa, big city. I know they're a G5 program right now, but they are AAU accredited as well. They have a rivalry with Miami. So I don't know if those would be the two teams that the Big Ten would necessarily take, but I think Miami would definitely be interested in joining the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, we saw obviously UCF had the great success of late, and they're a massive school, and obviously went to the Big 12. USF hasn't had quite the success of the field, but they're a massive school. They got like 50, 60,000 students. I don't think people realize how big a school they are down there. We got Manny Navarro from The Athletic. We're talking some Canes, final team at our 12-game in 12 weeks preview of the Orange. Miami will actually be in the Dome this year. Their first visit since way, way back in the Big East days. That'll be Thanksgiving Saturday coming up in the Dome. So, we always think back. I mean, you watch the U 30 for 30s, right? Like, you think back to the 80s and early 90s. I always think, those 01 and 02 Canes teams, man, they're the best college football teams I've ever seen with the talent they have. It's hard to get to that level for sure. What is standing in the way right now of Miami even approaching those levels that they had from those great teams we remember in the past?
Well, it's interesting. College football has obviously changed so much with the transfer portal, and the way you build teams now is completely different from the way those teams were back in the day. Look, a big reason Mario Cristobal came in and was hired as coach is because there's a lot of people down here in South Florida with a lot of money, billionaires and millionaires that wanted to invest in Miami's football program, but wanted to do it with Mario Cristobal as coach. So this is entering year 3 now. I think Miami's got one of the biggest NIL budgets in college football. They certainly spent some big money to go get Cam Ward to be their quarterback and to get Damian Martinez to come in and play running back. It's a changing game. It's a changing landscape. And Mario Cristobal is an excellent recruiter. Worked under Greg Schiano at Rutgers, worked under Nick Saban at Alabama. He knows that the game is won and lost in the trenches. And so he is trying to build a modern-day team with the transfer portal and recruiting, needed the budget, and he's got it. And that's the difference now, I think, with Miami and why I'm optimistic that they're going to turn things around, because you've got a guy who knows the blueprint and you got money behind it. And I think that's ultimately what wins in college football today.
Yeah, I mean, Cam Ward was the hottest, certainly shortlist of the hottest quarterbacks out there, and we see where he landed. So that tells you the many of the reasons he got there. With Cristobal, like, there's never been a question, right, of his recruiting acumen. You mentioned everywhere he's been, in Oregon and Alabama. He always gets guys. We saw the way the Georgia Tech game ended last year with failing to take a knee and losing the game. It leads to a lot of questions, and it's not the first time something like that's happened. Are the questions around Cristobal, are those isolated events and overblown, or are there legit questions about him, the way he handles in-game situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're fair criticisms, right? You can't lose a game you're winning when all you had to do was take a knee. I think it's a fair criticism. But I'll say this, Butch Davis got a lot of the same heat when he was Miami's coach and before he went to the NFL. A lot of people said he wasn't a very good in-game coach. Well, he went out and he built the best team in college football recruiting, right? And I think Mario essentially in a lot of ways is like Butch. And I think one thing he did learn from that humbling moment last year where everybody in the country was laughing at him was you got to do the smart thing no matter what. He had a running back in that game that he was trying to get over the 100-yard mark clearly. The kid got to 100 yards and fumbled the football. And those are the kind of things that as a football coach you can't do. Like you said, it happened to him when he was at Oregon against Stanford several years ago. You can't make those mistakes and call yourself a good football coach. So, guys coach, they learn, they evolve. I think Mario Cristobal understands what it takes to win. You can't meddle with the offense. Sometimes he gets criticized for maybe picking up the headset and trying to throw his 2 cents in on what the offense should do. Maybe he's a little bit more hands-off this season and going forward, and Miami finally starts to reach the levels that it hopes it reaches.
How good is Cam Ward, Manny? Like, I hear everything everyone's saying, and I believe it, but I can't say, where was he? Incarnate Word? I can't say I watched him play there. And realistically, I just didn't see a lot of Washington State the last couple of years.
Yeah.
How good is this guy?
Well, first of all, he's an alpha male is the right description for him. He is the kind of guy who can bring the locker room together. He loves challenging the defenses in practice, and I think that's a very underrated trait for quarterbacks nowadays. I'm not saying you don't need to be able to read defenses and know where to go with the football and play mistake-free. That's even more important. But I think in order to galvanize a football team, especially at the college level, where the rosters are constantly changing and you've got new players coming in and out, you need the kind of leader at the front, at the quarterback position. You saw what Michael Penix did last year with Washington. Mm-hmm. You saw Texas, the success that they had with a transfer quarterback. It's not easy to win a championship. I think the biggest trait Cam Ward has is that he galvanizes that team. He brings them together, and I'm not sure that Tyler Van Dyke was that guy here. He was a guy who loved to go play golf. He'd hang out with Xavier Restrepo, who's one of the best receivers on the team. But he wasn't for everybody, right? I think Cam Ward is for everybody, and I think that's really his biggest strength in terms of this team.
Okay, so it'll be interesting to watch. We'll see him in the Dome coming up on November 30th. Lastly, before we let you go, Manny, you cover the league as well, the league as a whole. I know you were part of the preview. You and Grace Rayner wrote it. You have Florida State in first, which I think is in line with everybody else. Clemson, then Miami. What's your sense of the league this year? What do you think the ACC is going to be in their first time trotting 17 teams out there?
Well, it's going to be entertaining for sure, right? We've got these new California teams. Everybody's going to be heading out to the West Coast at one point or another to either play Cal or Stanford or even to Texas to go play SMU. So it's going to be a new wrinkle. But I think there's a handful of teams that can win the league this year. I think NC State's a team that can surprise people and win the league. I know everybody sort of criticized Dave Doran. Hey, they can't win more than 9 games. I think they're more than capable of Grayson McCall. I think Florida State could certainly repeat. Clemson, they've proven they can win. I think Miami's got the talent to win it this year. Louisville could be a team that sort of comes up and bites people and surprises them again. So it's a wide open league this year, and I'm just looking forward to watching how things shake out.
It should be a fascinating year in the ACC for sure. That starts less than 48 hours from now with that Georgia Tech Florida State game over in Dublin. Manny, always great to chat. Thanks so much for hopping on for a few today.
Thanks for having me.
There is Manny Navarro. Check him out on The Athletic. Covers Miami for sure, but also covers the whole league and does a lot of recruiting stuff as well in the